Okay, thanks everyone. I guess we could do a couple of jumping jacks since it's after lunch, but we probably won't since I probably hurt myself. Anyway, I'm David Dollihite. I'm with Bridgewater Consulting Group. It's a full-service management consulting group based in California. We have offices in San Antonio. And I used to say that we work at the intersection of mobility, electrification, and smart cities. I've kind of altered that lately to say we work at the coming collision of smart cities, electrification, and mobility. As probably some of my physicists in the room could attest, you got two outcomes when you have a high-density molecular collision, right? You either contain and manage the collision, and you get all this wonderful energy that can be channeled into lights and cars and EVs and other things. Or you don't manage it, and you just have the collision, and you get a pond of two-headed catfish. So hopefully some of the things that we'll talk about today are how do you get to the contained, managed solution that's beneficial to everyone and no ugly catfish. So with that, I'm going to start and get the panelists to give a brief introduction of themselves. But we had this contextual conversation last week, and people in the audience, the energy coming through the phone from this group actually scared my cat and made it run upstairs. So I'm going to ask the panelists, as you say a little bit about yourself and your breadth of experience and your expertise, just also if you could say a quick word about why are you so passionate about this space, about what we're doing and what we're talking about up here on stage. So Drew, can I get you to start?
Yeah, absolutely. So Drew Higgins, CPS Energy, products and services. And my background is varied. Was in the Marine Corps, was a pilot, did some intel work, traveled the world a little bit, worked in financial services, worked at General Motors. All that to say, the future is clear. And what I really want to kind of get through is that when you see an inflection point coming, those happen. It happens so, so few times that where you can say, "Look, this is coming," that you have to take advantage of it, and that's the core of my passion. And I see how this inflection point can have an impact on just hundreds of millions of people. It can make for a better environment. It could pull people out of poverty. It can change the face of the planet, and that's why every day when I wake up, every night when I go to sleep, it's EVs, it's photovoltaics, it's battery storage. These types of sea changes, you don't get an opportunity more than once.
Okay. Thank you, Drew. Sam?
So I'm Sam Sargent. I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff at Capital Metro up the road in Austin. We're the region's public transportation provider. And I share that every single morning waking up passion. And for me, it all started with mobility, with transportation, with planning for the near and especially long-term futures in my role. I'm a lawyer by training. I worked for a congressman in Austin, but I've been with Capital Metro for 5 years, and I work with our electric vehicle program, with the autonomous vehicle pilot that we tried out last year, but especially with Project Connect, which is going to be a multi-billion-dollar, multi-generational investment in mobility for Central Texas. But I wake up with that same sense of urgency, which is that we have such an opportunity with the challenges, whether they be environmental, and I mean that in terms of both climate, but I also mean for Austin, but this is probably true of many of the places that you come from, as we urbanize as a country and as a state, we simply have to start moving people more efficiently, and that means both the energy that you use to move them and the spaces that you put them inside of. And so I love that. I have a huge passion for solving that problem. But at the end of the day, the first thing I think about is the fact that I get to help put somebody on that bus and give them, I think, access to opportunity. So there's so many things, there's so many elements of all of our jobs, I'm sure, and especially everybody here who I met on the panel. It's just a really exciting time. It's a big challenge, but it's a big opportunity.
Thank you. Aniela?
Hi, I'm Aniela Kuzon from Ford. I lead a team called City Innovations, where we run innovation programs for local government. We've worked with 7 cities in the last 2 years. My background before mobility was actually in the energy space, both at a technology accelerator in Detroit and before that in China. So it's pretty cool to see these topics coming together. I think what I'm most passionate about in terms of this topic is our approach is really to think about how do you put people at the center of everything we do. We've talked to over 2,000 residents in those 7 cities, young mothers, senior citizens, people with physical disabilities, cognitive disabilities, those Gen Z, world problem solvers that we learned about this morning. And it's really, I think, an incredible privilege to be able to talk to so many people and then really go back and think about where can technology, where can innovation help, and then start to see those things actually come to life.
Thank you, Aniela. Paul?
Hi, I'm Paul Snyder, and I'm the chair of transportation design at CCS. And I've been doing that for about 5 years now. And prior to that, I was quite happy working away for Honda in Southern California. And when I got the phone call through LinkedIn to run the program for transportation design at CCS, I had to think about it because I was quite happy with my life. I didn't have to travel on the 405 in LA, but the opportunity to lead the program during such an incredible inflection point or age of disruption was really something that I couldn't turn down because, as was also alluded to this morning, these times are the times of most change probably since Henry Ford asked everybody to sell their horse and buy a car. So being in the automotive sector for the last 25 plus years, over 30 now actually, has really been kind of a very slow evolution of what's the next feature and function that we need to incorporate, and what kind of technology is going to change the appearance of the vehicles that we drive and that we own. But now we're talking about a period of time where we don't actually have to own the car anymore. And so what kind of new experiences will be available to us? And then in working with Aniela at College for Creative Studies through a Ford-sponsored program, these kinds of notions of inclusive design and really, most importantly for me, the reason that I get out of bed every morning is to make the world a better place and a more equitable place, to get kids to school and to get moms and dads to work. And I think that the technologies that are coming now are going to enable that possibility.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Just to kind of give you an idea of how this is going to go, we did several workshops, several of you participated in them, around what does the audience want to hear? What are the kind of top of mind, either problems, solutions that you're looking for, or just things you want to discuss? And the 2 far and away topics that came out, number 1 was mobility equity. We're going to save that for the middle. Number 2 was around data analytics and this whole new world of all these connected vehicles and autonomous vehicles, and there's this new sea of data that's coming at us, and how do we use that to lift everybody's boat? So we'll talk a little bit about that, and then we're going to kind of shift back toward the practical side in preparation for some later remarks by Paul, and talk about, well, we got to pay for this stuff, and then how do we get her done? So, Aniela, if you'd please start us off, though, talking about all this new, this rich sea of data that's coming at us from all these technologies. How do we use it? How do we use it to make this boat go faster?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. So Ford has been investing in a pretty significant data analytics division. There are thousands of people now, and all they do every day is think about how you use data, how you protect, customers' privacy, how you make sure it's clean. And we're really lucky because we actually have 2 data scientists on my team that are part of that bigger group. And a couple of things that we've learned working with cities is, one, I think that data is a really important tool in understanding kind of even where are there system level hotspots that of different challenges that need to be solved. We often simulate How hard is it to do certain trips, for young mothers? How hard is it to get to the doctor and the pharmacy, for senior citizens? How hard is it to get from maybe a community center and a coffee with a friend? These are really hard things to know outside of the individual level, kind of what's working and what's not, without being able to use data to kind of paint that system level picture. And then the other thing we're starting to look at is how do we use even connected vehicle to add additional depth. A lot of what our team does is actually just using public data sets, but what we've started to look at is, for example, with safety, most of the way that safety for road conditions is measured is through crash reports. But we know that those are incomplete, not everyone is reporting them, and also they're reported inconsistently. So what we've started to look at is how can we actually start to pull vehicle data where maybe there was a harsh braking event, maybe there was a quote-unquote near miss, and actually start to then again paint this picture of where intersections might be particularly dangerous or segments of road that might need additional thought, and then start to work on what are the different options that might exist. And so I think, it's really interesting the breadth of ways that data can help a lot of the conversations here, but really making sure that you have clear questions to answer. And then I think the investment in data scientists who can really start to kind of problem solve, because it still is such an emergent field.
Okay, thanks. And Sam, I'm gonna flip over to you now, because it seems like every white paper that I read has some block in there that says based on data from City of Austin. So could you talk a little bit about, you seem to be at the forefront of collecting and using data, and a lot of people are basing on some particularly important decisions on the data coming out of the City of Austin.
Yes, yeah, Capital Metro in the City of Austin, we've worked really closely over the past couple of years. We've gotten a lot of national interest, most of all during South by Southwest, when we're able to show people all the various ways that we can collect this data and what we're doing with it. And that ranges from smart sensors, whether it be power, water, but also our traffic signaling system, which is critically important to helping out Capital Metro, and our transit system. On the transit side specifically, we've really started investing in a lot more data, being able to collect a lot of data points on board our vehicles, which is great and is all well and good and helps us identify where are major trip generators. We did a major redesign of our bus network in June of 2018. That was at least when it was implemented. I know that San Antonio is looking at a similar redesign of the bus network, but a lot of that was how do we redesign this so that it works for more people? There was the main reason why Capital Metro, like many other transit authorities, were seeing a decline in ridership year over year since the last recession, was simply that we no longer had a good product out there. And to make our product better, we had to make it more efficient, more inviting, but we also needed to make sure that it was going to the places that people now go. So we have pretty sophisticated origin destination data, and we've also worked very closely with the City of Austin, with a couple of nonprofits and folks in the business community to also identify where are the new trip generators so that we can grow our ridership. All of those things have been critically important, and especially as we start moving into the micro-transit sphere, which a lot of other transit agencies have done. We have a service called Pickup that has been really successful so far. These are 6 on-call zones. The goal is that they're not so large that they can't get a vehicle to the person requesting the trip in 5 to 10 minutes, but almost all of that is based on cell phone data. It's based on residential and demographic information so that we can connect people to the right services at the right time in the right way.
Okay. Drew, I know you had some thoughts on this.
Well, going back to the data kind of question, if I can get a show of hands, how many people own General Motor vehicles? That's Chevy. Did you sign that OnStar agreement? If you did, we have your data. We have where you're going, we know what radio station, we know how many butts are in seats, right? And since 2012, General Motors instituted a data collection program that was mainly supposed to be about maintenance. However, the data, the data organization that's figured out ways of monetizing that information. And so the point I want to make is that the data in vehicles is only going to be utilized as far as it can be monetized, right? And it can be used to improve a process, it can be used to drive down cost, or it could be sold. For example, intersection data. We had Liberty Mutual, we had Allstate, and especially Progressive beating down the door trying to get this very useful information. The problem is, and this goes for every industry, what you should want to do is protect against protect PII, right? So that means anonymizing the data, aggregating the data, and trying to distill insights from it. And so as we look ahead, especially like from CPS Energy's perspective, if we were to be able to access maybe metro data as well as personal use vehicle data along with street information and things like that, we would want to protect our customers' data first. And then after you protect it, then you try to figure out what insights you can derive from it after it's protected.
Okay. And thanks, Drew. That's, the PII thing, always the PII thing.
Always.
Now, Paul, your organization, I understand, is a pretty big consumer of this data. You use it in a lot of the things that you do. Could you kind of take us through that and maybe throw out what's missing? Like what data are you not getting that might make some of this stuff go better?
Well, industrial design has evolved along with the automobile in many ways. So if you speak to an industrial designer now, he or she may speak of design research or field research. But generally speaking, there are data scientists out there and marketing professionals and researchers that gather an enormous amount of data that they then give to us and the engineers, and whether that be a manufacturing engineer, mechanical engineer, electrical engineer, computer scientist. So the industrial design studio is really the crossroads of all those disciplines coming together, and so we have to package all those notions and learn from the data. Oftentimes conclusions are already drawn, and we're given that, and we're asked to come up with solutions, creative solutions, problem-solving solutions, and sometimes it's just entertainment solutions. I'd like to see the data that says that people really enjoy really large screens in front of their steering wheels. When you talk about data, 1.25 million accidents a year, that's more people killed by any terrorists or crime every year, just because of distraction or drunk driving. So that's data that we think about. So next time you go to shop for a car, do you really want the one with the big screen in front of you? Nothing against Tesla, but they're getting bigger still. So those are the kind of ways that we think about data and the ways that we try and implement them. But we're really at the crossroads where the data comes together with the the rubber meets the road, as it were, with how much money do we have to invest.
Okay. Thanks, Paul. And I said we'd saved the number one polling topic, which was around mobility equity, and we had a really, I'm gonna call it a fiery conversation in our kind of roundtable before this about it. And as we kind of think through, we're getting all this data and we're getting all this insight around mobility, which really provides insights that we've probably never had before at a granular level on how people live their lives. And to Drew's point, there's a certain amount of responsibility that has to come with that, if you get that kind of insight. But being able to understand, again, like when you're planning, where are the new riders starting? How can we get ahead of this? How can we make people's lives better? How can we get them to health care when they need it? So we want to kind of segue now into, let's build off this new analytics and this new insight, and how do we start using that with the new technologies around EVs and AVs to kind of address the whole equity issue. And I'm not going to restrict it to mobility equity, because mobility equity actually speaks to everything. So anybody volunteer to start?
Well, I'll start. So starting off with EVs, the architecture on EVs is a sea change in terms of data collection. Previously, where we might pull 1.8 to 2 megabytes per night off of a vehicle. Now we're looking at, gigs of data to the point where they were timing out because we didn't have enough bandwidth to get it off the vehicles. And so you can do a lot of things. So for marketing, for example, we would track Cadillacs and say how many Cadillacs that were listening to a certain radio station passed towards an intersection at this time of day. And that way we could pass it to radio stations for marketing information, right? So if you apply that same type of information, but you try to do it from an equity lens, you can say, okay, how many vehicles pass by this area? And if it's a low amount, you might say you want to pass that to rideshare services, or you might want to instrument some certain e-mobility solutions for those areas that have, lower traffic. Additionally, when we're looking at Evie, we'll call it life cycle, we already know it's going to be more extensive, and the more data we get, the longer, the longer the time frame that we get, we understand how long they'll be able to last, and that is going to be useful in getting those vehicles, those used vehicles, into those neighborhoods. I don't know if everyone knows this, but the majority of people who get vehicles don't buy new vehicles. It's 67% get used vehicles, and if you go to low to moderate income, that jumps up to over 80%. Their first vehicle or the new vehicle they get is going to be a used vehicle. And if you can get those individuals into used vehicles based upon data, you know how long those vehicles are going to live. You can point them to those vehicles that are going to have the longest lifespan, which adds value. Additionally, EVs have 4% of the maintenance costs of ICE, so it's a natural trend line when you look at kind of this data that says you can provide equitable transportation to low to moderate income individuals, and this just kind of extrapolates infinitely when you look at what you can do in terms of EVs, autonomous vehicles, and data, and enhancing the lives of low to moderate income customers.
Yeah, could you just review for the group the comments you made about charging time?
Yeah,
think about the one thing we can't get any more of is time, and making everybody's time equitable. But
you guys are going to love this. Okay, so EVs. I guess I'm going to start at the very beginning, and that's EVs have different costs based upon value. Pretty easy to understand. For the most part, EVs are significantly more expensive at this point than internal combustion engines. However, on the low end, you have like the Nissan Leaf, the Chevy Bolt. The components of that EV cost less. It just makes sense, right? And not to get too technical, but the chargers or inverters in those vehicles are of a smaller capacity. Normally, it's about a 7 kilowatt inverter. That's the amount of electricity that can be charged into that vehicle at a point in time. Teslas, Audi e-trons, Jaguar I-Paces, you're looking at a 21.8 kilowatt inverter. All that means is when you go to charge, it takes you 3 times as long in a Nissan Leaf or Chevy Bolt to get the same amount of electricity that you would get in a Tesla or an e-tron. And the problem with this from an equity perspective is right now, for the most part, chargers go by time of use. So if you're charging by the hour and it takes 3 hours longer to get the same amount of charge as a Tesla in your Leaf, how is that fair? How is that equitable? And so there's a lot of rebalancing we have to do, and the utility plays a huge role in that, right? There's 4 big obstacles to adoption of EVs, and I'll go through them really quickly, not to bore everybody, but the first one is consumer preference, right? And we've seen consumers now, it's 40% of consumers now have EVs in their solution set. So that's getting bigger. That means when you go into a dealer, you're at least cross-shopping an EV, 40%. The second piece is OEMs, right? And that's 2 parts to that. One, the cost of batteries. Cost of batteries right now are about $500 per kilowatt hour, which is better because it was $1,000 per kilowatt hour just 2 years ago. But that has to get down to below $100 per kilowatt hour. Additionally, they have to change their whole business model, but we can talk about that at drinks after this. That's bigger. It's a bigger problem. The third part is regulatory environment, and as we can all see, CPS Energy is in here. for the most part, regulations are becoming more favorable for EVs. And then finally, infrastructure. And that's where we all really play a huge role in making sure that the infrastructure is available and acceptable. And part of that infrastructure discussion is, how do we charge for this electricity? Do we use the old model of fuel, or do we use a new model? And that's kind of why we're all here. This is part of City of the Future. It's like, what new paradigms are we going to put in place to facilitate the growth of EVs? And I don't have an answer, but we're going to try a whole bunch of stuff.
I think Aniela can help us out with the answer. I know a lot of the stuff that y'all have done at Ford, you've tried to address a lot of these questions in your pilot projects and whatnot. So can you?
Yeah, I was thinking about your question, and Paul and I were talking before we came up about inclusive design, which I actually learned about at CCS when they had some workshops on it. And basically the idea is that you can't eliminate the bias of the designer. That you have to design things with people, not just for them. And I personally have really come to believe that this is true, whether it's for data analytics policies, for EV business model of the future kind of conversations, really developing new ways to bring residents, bring workers, bring visitors across different demographics, across different use cases into the conversation, so that you can really start to use that almost as primary research to then kind of create your solution. And I think that that is so important in the conversation around how you do anything related to equity, because there are many people who are not part of the conversation today. We actually just did an innovation program with the city of Austin. It was focused on access to health. It ended up having a really big focus on racial equity in East Austin. And one of the things that we were talking about that kind of came to mind when you asked this question is, the ATD started talking about how sidewalk conditions are an equity issue. Because if you live in a neighborhood where sidewalks have been disinvested in over time, and you cannot get to the bus stop, then you don't have the ability to get to work as easily. You don't have the ability to get your kids to school as easily as safety. And while that might seem like a transportation issue, it can actually be an equity issue as well. And so one of the things that we've done is we've again talked to a lot of residents, and one of the solutions we'll be piloting there is actually, it's pretty cool. It takes sensors and puts them on wheelchairs, and it basically evaluates the conditions of sidewalks by literally just having people who are in wheelchairs go along their kind of daily paths. And then what it is able to do is create an aggregate data set for the city to say, these are the specific road segments that are in particular kind of disrepair. Again, that might not seem like an equity issue, but the city of Austin, at least the groups that we were working with, are starting to say it is. Because if you look at the correlation of where those locations are and other equity kind of issues, there's a lot of overlap. And so I think that there's such an important topic. It's such a hard topic. But I really have come to believe that the most important thing in terms of how we address it is to design with, not for people. And that way, you're not only kind of coming up with new solutions, but you're also educating, giving access to opportunity, kind of expanding who has, a part of the broader conversation as you go.
Yeah. And, Sam, how did y'all get all the people in Austin to the table? I mean, to do some of these things. I mean, that's where I've witnessed in other cities literally around the globe is there's so many competing interests. There's so many people that want their name on it. How do you kind of get everybody to the table and get them to the point that it's a shared, vested, mutual interest, we got to do this?
Yeah, I think that's important because you do have to design, you have to design with, not for, because if you design for, you don't get the same sense of ownership. And so I think to your question, I think that it's the sense of ownership is what brings people to the table. And maybe that is playing into ego, and that's all perfectly fine and natural, and I think that can even be healthy. And then it also is validating the problems that somebody may have, whether they be a sidewalk, whether it's the complete absence of a city service, whatever it might be. But I think that bringing everybody to the table is giving everybody a sense of ownership over the solution, but the first step is all agreeing upon the problem, that you keep it high level enough that everybody can agree on what the issue is. And then you wind up getting to a solution that everybody can own. And while it may not benefit everybody 100%, everybody comes away with some kind of win. They come away with the satisfaction of collaborating with people. But I do think that it's a really difficult thing to do. I think that oftentimes, a phrase that I've heard, when you're talking about the input that you receive, especially working for a government agency, Austin also has a public utility as well, so Austin Energy has some of the same issues, and especially when you're trying to innovate, is how do you hear people, especially the people who do not have the luxury of time or money or mobility to come and provide their input. So you also have to come up with as many mechanisms to get input as you possibly can. It legitimizes your process. It makes people, again, feel that sense of ownership that's so critical, because otherwise, as I think many people in this room know just from experience, you wind up with the articulate, the angry, and the affluent. And those are the people who are able to come on a Tuesday evening to a meeting. You're not able to get to the person who can't get to the bus stop easily because of the sidewalk. They just don't have that luxury. So I think that it's agreeing on the problem and then allowing everybody to own part of the solution.
Okay. Paul, I think you get called in to do a lot of this from a structured perspective, try to facilitate these types of things around the design thinking. You have comments?
Perhaps from the structure of an automobile or the architecture of an automobile for sure, but as far as urban planning and bigger megacity or urban growth issues, we definitely have to work together with communities, governments, and on the state and national level as well. And that's kind of what we're waiting on, really, in a lot of ways, to enable Evie and VTOL, which technologies are maturing very, very quickly as some government regulation. But in terms of equitable mobility, one thing that I think that we really need to keep in mind is that even if a secondhand electric vehicle is accessible from a price point of view, as cities are growing, regardless if they're polluting our air or if they're electric, there's still just going to be too many cars on the road with the existing infrastructure. So one of the other things that we're looking at CCS in terms of inclusive design and trying to find a way to raise the tide for the disenfranchised neighborhoods around Detroit and other areas around the world is shared use vehicles. Pilots have been out there for a while with Uber and with Lyft and so on, but private industry, private investment, and governments really need to work together to develop some of these strategies to get people to school and to get people to work. And in doing so, they'll be fortunate in that they will own the data, which is another kind of question altogether. And that can be used, obviously, to help people more rapidly get to where they need to be going, to help people during the journey in terms of accessing information, continuing to work, or self-improvement in some way, lessons provided through their journey via some kind of connectivity on board. So there's really a lot that can be done, but I think we crucially have to recognize that there's just too many vehicles on the road in most urban settings right now, and we're at gridlock almost in many cities already.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Which you kind of touched on the R word. So let's talk about the R word. And again, I'm going to kind of open it up, so jump ball, but the regulatory environment, let's make it easy and hard. Do you see the existing regulatory environment as a positive or a negative toward the advancement of electric and autonomous vehicles? Just keep it simple to begin with.
Well, this is a question that I've received on a number of occasions, and basically I'll answer it like this. You're not going to take away people's ability to drive a car or a truck unless you first take away their guns, right? Because we're in America. I mean, it's a joke, but in all honesty, people take that level of freedom very, very seriously. Owning a car, running out to wherever you park it in your garage or in your driveway and getting to where you need to go, that's a kind of freedom that that was enabled by the automobile, but that kind of structural basis for how we do business in the United States needs to change because we just can't contain that anymore. So personally, I think geogating a lot of the highways, geogating inner cities, allowing people to continue to drive in certain areas is a great idea.
Thanks. Drew, CPS, or well, everybody up here, you get into a lot of cross-jurisdictional regulatory issues. Anytime you start talking about EVs and AVs, I'm putting this on the street, you want to put these sensors on my network. So what's your view of the existing regulatory environment, and how could we potentially shape that to start maybe alleviating some of these cross-jurisdictional headbutting that goes on?
So, this is a loaded question, right? There's no such thing as, I'll say, good or bad regulation. It's this regulation that businesses have to learn to deal with, right? And so when you look at the current, we'll call it OEM environment, they're learning to deal with whatever the regulatory environment is. Currently, it favors kind of the old model of internal combustion engines being sold from dealerships, being registered by the state and paying in the taxes being paid for roads and things like that. But as with any inflection point, this is going to be a huge disruption for everything across the board. The business models that supported the dealerships no longer exist. 76% of income from dealerships comes from maintenance. And when you have a vehicle that only has 4% of the maintenance of an internal combustion engine, that model falls apart. So all of the OEMs, with the exception of Tesla, has to change. When you look at the current tax system that uses to pay for roads, it's based upon fuel tax. It's going away. They're going to have to figure out a way around it. When you look at private ownership of vehicles, including insurance, these things are going to change. We can't support a system that won't pay for itself. If vehicles stop running into each other, the insurance industry falls apart. Unfortunately, it's based upon cars hitting each other. And when they stop hitting each other, they fall apart, but you still need insurance. These are all things that we have to innovate around. And so, do I have the answers? No, but I can point out problems all day long.
Okay, let me do a time check before we go to, okay. Got a few minutes left. I want to save a few minutes for questions. So if we could maybe get the mics ready. One of the things, that we touched on, and we had to make this kind of quick, but, how do we pay for this, right? Nothing gets done without the money. So, Ford stepped up big. There's other organizations that have stepped up, putting private money into pilot projects and whatnot, trying to get these markets to accelerate. And you had some very kind of, I won't call it shocking figures around, you coming from the GM world into the utility world, and the magnitude and difference of resources and the cost of the resources. So could I get you to comment on that? And then kind of based on that, if you could kind of do counterpoint from the private sector, or public sector. Private. Are you private or public? You're both, but commercial. Let's just call it commercial. Okay.
Yeah,
Drew.
so your data's going to pay for it. So your spending habits, your location, where you're going, every single piece of that data is going to be monetized. For better, though not for worse, right? Obviously, privacy has a value, and that's going to be key and part and parcel to your decisions and allowing your data to be shared. But your vehicle wants to know when you go to Starbucks so that they can staff up Starbucks. It's going to happen. It already is. One of the first things I did when I was at GM was I sold a huge tranche of data to LexisNexis in order to help out insurance companies better predict risks. This is just one of those things. Your data has a value, and that value is going to help this sea change come to pass. That is my opinion, but I think it's a well-informed opinion.
Okay.
I'm going to take it as a compliment that you didn't know if I was in the private or the public sector. Ford is a private company,
Okay.
or at least not in
Publicly
the
traded, though,
private
right?
sector, publicly traded.
Okay.
But I think it's a really good question that I don't think really there's an answer for. I'm really curious, Sam, your perspective, because, not being in the public sector, my observation is that there will need to be changes to the way we finance infrastructure, the way we finance transportation systems in order to enable a lot of the different services that we hope will have all of these benefits. I had I'm gonna steal someone else's answer. There was someone, I went to a panel at CES this year, and there was someone who was talking about IoT, and why has the kind of IoT smart city kind of promise not really materialized in the way that people have been expecting over the last few years. And the conversation that this panel was talking about is basically in the sectors where there is a clear use case, as Sam mentioned, a clear problem to be solved and a business case as a result, you see a lot of adoption and scale. And the example they gave was in the military, and how they're using IoT to really support soldier safety and advanced scouting and all of these different, use cases that have like a really clear value to the purchaser. What they talked about is in fields like the public sector, the use cases and the business cases are a lot harder to narrow in, and I think it's also complicated by the fact that many of the infrastructure which will be needed to enable these future business models and technologies is a public good, meaning it's not not one person doesn't just buy it, right? We all pay taxes, we pool our resources, and then somehow we have to kind of figure out how to use that, those investments in a way that we all kind of agree in. And I think that the conversation right now is kind of what do we need to invest in? And again, my experience in working with the 7 cities we have for the last 2 years is the private sector and the public sector in some ways are in the same position. We're making billion-dollar bets without a crystal ball and without a lot of information about kind of what's going to happen. And so I think that that this is a really important question that deserves a lot more conversation. And there isn't a clear answer. But I think also pilots really help, because then you can start to kind of understand, does this specific application work? Is it through a maybe data-backed kind of metrics evaluation? Is it actually adding enough value to merit a larger investment? If it were, then you can have a conversation around what's the structure. But that all only happens if you can identify why you even want to do it. And I think that for many aspects of kind of smart cities, smart transportation still needs to become a lot more specific.
Okay, thanks. So I'm going to jump now to Sam and to get her done. I'll take us back to the morning sessions when Eric, city manager for San Antonio, was talking about, just pull the car in the garage, okay? You don't have to worry about lining it up, make it perfectly straight. Just get the car in the garage, and we'll straighten it up later. So Sam, y'all seem to have been able to at least get the car partially in the garage. So could you maybe just hit a couple high points for the group? Why do you think y'all have been successful about doing things and so many other people are frankly still just talking about it?
I think that what we've done is we have just instilled a sense of urgency, both in our internal team, but also in the community. And I think it's a sense of urgency that has 2 sides. And one is a sense of urgency because the new technology out there and the growth that you see in Austin and the growth that you see demographically and all of these changes is exciting. It's something we should be excited about, and it should make us feel a sense of urgency about embracing new technologies and embracing change. And then, as is the case for us in a public sector agency in Austin, Texas, but it could be for you in a private business in California, whatever it may be, is a sense of urgency because there is a problem out there that is just desperate to be solved. And I think that sense of urgency has been a big part of it. I think failing fast, trying again, failing fast over and over and over is a really critical thing to do. Trial and error, there's no shame in it. And I mean, the private sector has probably known that for much longer than the public sector has, but you just have to try new things because in the process, you'll come to better and better solutions. You'll find new partners. Those things are really critical. I think that sense of urgency and the willingness to fail fast, because who knows, you may succeed fast, but eventually you will succeed.
Okay. Thanks, Sam. Okay, folks, thanks for, well, not thanks yet, but we got about 5 minutes left, so we're going to take questions, and then Paul's actually going to come up after that and provide us with some more in-depth commentary about this subject. But I have a really hard time seeing, I can see one hand right there.
I had a question as far as building the EV infrastructure. Could you talk about what CPS is doing to build that infrastructure for the EV population?
I think this is for me, so I'll be glad to. So right now we have a EV subscription program, right? And the point of that is to make sure that for new EV buyers and prospective EV buyers that you have the comfort to know that you can charge anywhere. So there's 5 components or paradigms that have to be made in order to sell EV. These are moments of truth, right? It's the digital moment of truth. There's the in-store moment of truth. There's the first driving moment of truth. There's a charging moment of truth. And then finally, there is the sales and after service, basically getting your car serviced. And a lot of that is up to the dealers, right? But some of that is done, that digital portion beforehand. And if you don't feel comfortable with knowing that there's places to charge, you're not even gonna look. So that's the first thing we're doing. Secondly, we're helping build out basically EV charging infrastructure by physically paying for chargers and helping other entities in the community build those out. And we'll be coming out and rolling out new programs in the future to help facilitate that. We're going to be partnering with our partners in Austin to help build out this infrastructure. Additionally, we're going to work with the city to basically make it advantageous to buy an EV with parking spots and driving lanes and things like that. So it's robust. We don't have it figured out, but we're going to test and learn. We're going to fail. We're going to fail fast, and we're going to get this thing figured out.
Okay, thanks, Drew. Right up here.
How you doing? First, let me say awesome panel. Really enjoy the conversation. But my question, I believe, is for Sam. You guys connected with IOTA Foundation in Austin, and I wanted to know if you were a part of that. And if you were a part of that, how did you initiate the conversation to get IOTA to somewhat incorporate their ecosystem when it relates to the DLT or distributed ledger technology for Austin?
Unfortunately, I was not, so I can't speak to that. I apologize. That may have been one of our partners at Austin Energy or with Austin Transportation. Sorry about that.
Question over here.
Yeah, I have a quick question about the R word. That's the regulation, and this goes to anybody on the panel. I'd like to know your views about what you think about the most effective, or maybe there's no word like most effective, but what are your views about self-regulation, that is industry self-regulation, government regulation, or some hybrid of the two? And which do you feel would be effective for things like data privacy protection?
I can take a stab at that. I think I'm going to answer it maybe in an indirect way, which is when you asked the question before, the conversation that came to mind was scooters, which maybe sounds like a little bit unrelated to data privacy, but I think what's been really interesting is when scooters and kind of dockless bikes started, and they started in China, what happened is they just got dropped into cities. And many cities didn't have regulations to prevent them from being on the sidewalk, right? And so there was this really interesting evolution in regulation over the last, say, maybe 12 to 18 months, where there was this kind of initial wave of something new that laws just were not prepared for. And then there was kind of almost a stepping back and saying, okay, we're not going to allow this until we come and we figure out what the right way to do it is. And you see different cities in different areas on different progressions in that conversation. There are scooters here. There are not scooters everywhere. But it takes a lot of people coming together to figure it out, not just, the city. Many roads may be state-owned. There's also federal regulations and things like that that need to come into play. And so in this idea of, is it self-regulating? Is it at the city level? Is it at the county level, a state level, federal level? I think it's going to take a lot of conversations across all of those levels to really understand, whether it's data, you kind of were talking about, future uses and, how do consumers even know what they're signing up for? How do you make sure that people are protected? Or it's something as simple as, is the infrastructure literally in place to enable the safe operation of this mode of transportation that people want? The regulatory environment's actually pretty complicated in order to be able to respond to those new solutions. And so I don't think it's necessarily one or the other. I think it's having the systems in place to be able to really quickly understand kind of what has entered the market and how do you pilot, fail fast, learn what's working, learn what's not working, hopefully in a safe way. But then as a result of that, put in new frameworks that allow these solutions to come to market, to add value, but in a way that can be managed by the public sector where needed, so that it's really done in a way that benefits people and society, and it's not just a free for all.
Okay. Thank you. I think we're getting the shepherd crook here. Anyway, please join me in giving a round of applause to our panelists. Enjoyed having the impact for the candor in the discussion today. And Aaron?